PSI or optional candidates. So please take a note of this. However, even for general study students, there is a certain methodology that I want you to adapt and think. No matter which country we are dealing with, there is one rule that you should always remember. See, there are two ways to conduct international relations. One is personality cult. So you are using a leader's charisma to win over the opponent. And the second route is through institutions. This is not just about international relations. This is true for any sphere of work. You're running a company. You're running a government. You're running a democratic institution. Wherever you are going, a single person cannot outcompete the institutional strength. For example, this present situation of the personality cults involved, whether we are talking about Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, or our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, all these individuals have their own charisma in their own sphere of influence. And institutions took a back step when it comes to Trump and Putin. Okay, so the relations are mostly navigated because of their own personality traits, their own charisma, their own ideology, and India had to adapt to that. And we also have our own personality cult influence in international relations. Right. So the problem with this is it can change according to the situation, according to the personality that is in power. And that is unpredictable, undesirable. Yes or no? Because you can't have any control over who is going to be power in the next term in a foreign country. But you can always have a predictability and stability in foreign policy if you know that these are the norms that will govern. We will set some rules. There are some established rules. And you're not going to cross that threshold. And if you do cross that threshold, let's say for example, you know that no matter who is in power, we are not going to break our diplomatic ties with a foreign country. We will still negotiate. We will respect that seat. There are some principles that will govern our policy discourse. If this is the stance, India will not back out if some other person is there in that seat. Let's say if the POTUS is not Donald Trump, someday you might have any other person. There is an influence of the person, but it should never be at the mercy of that person alone. There should be some rules, ground rules that are set. So why are we discussing this? This article, the Alaska movement, is referring to the meeting between the United States President Donald Trump as well as Vladimir Putin. What is the takeaway? Before we even talk about the takeaway, let's look at what is at stake for each of the parties. US, Russia. See, this is not there in the article, but I will also give a background context. Okay. We discussed this briefly. One of the poll promise of Donald Trump is to reduce the debt. There is a treasury bond which is maturing in next quarter, if I'm not wrong. They have to pay a huge debt. You know what is a treasury bond? Let's say, for example, if you want to take some loan, the government will print a bond paper and give a surety that I am taking so and so money, so amount of money, I will pay back with certain amount of interest. And we are talking about the world's largest economy. Obviously, it is carrying some weight. So now, in this next quarter, US is supposed to pay back that debt. Right. There are many conspiracy theories that US is not in a position to do so. To raise that revenue, they are imposing tariffs. And Donald Trump does not care about what is going to be the impact on the global economy. Either way, according to these conspiracy theories, it's a win-win scenario. How? Let's see. If you impose a tariff, what will happen? Inflation will rise. And markets will crash. Not just in the US, but across the world. And in such a scenario, where will investors run? To the safest investments possible. Yes or no? So the way US is deciding to pay back the debt is again raise another debt. And that is the larger agenda and the whole thought process behind why Donald Trump is behaving like this. One measure is that he is going for a deep cut in government spending. The big beautiful bill, as it is called, is one such measure. He's cutting down the number of departments through Doge, right? And this gamble may or may not pay off. In this larger scenario, government of US is using every possible pawn in the global politics. And we are going back to the age-old debate of the Cold War and the biggest opponent of Russia. See, if US has to earn money, war cannot stop trade. So, US wants to stop trade, or at least it pretends to say so. So, this is a bargaining lever. It wants to isolate Russia. This is something that we already know. And Donald Trump has not been a big fan of wars anyway. It's a good thing because it will stop trade. It will probably impact only one industry, the weapons industry. A lot of people comment that Trump does not have investments in defense industry, so he's not really pro-war, which is a good thing. But the larger picture here is that wherever multilateral organizations like NATO are involved, it is not just the whims and fancies of one individual. There are many stakeholders involved. So this bullying is not exactly working for the US. Yes, global markets are treading an uncertain path, but it is not exactly benefiting the US as this conspiracy theorists say. So there must be some larger agenda, right? What is that larger agenda? It is in the context of dollar becoming weak, where global investments are fading out, where there are new avenues, we are treading a new path, a path that is marked by the growth of AI. There is climate change investment demand. So every business is undergoing a structural transformation and there is global uncertainty. And if US doesn't exert its power at this point, the balance can shift to the Oriental East, dominated by China, India and Russia. The trioca that we are talking about. So US wants to retain that hegemony. How? By tapping out or isolating individual players in this region. And this is the larger game. If India has to navigate this challenging environment, there are some lessons that we have to take away. Lesson number 1, we cannot depend on personality cults. Lesson number 2, India has to move towards a stable foreign policy objective and diversify. What are the biggest worries? Like if we have to depend on Russia, where are we depending more? One, energy. More than energy, it is defense. And second is energy. In both these fronts, India is now trying to diversify instead of putting all eggs in a single basket. Why is this? Because it's a risky proposition. See what is happening right now. Even if India wants to carry out a trade with Russia through cheap oil, there is a risk of sanctions being imposed on India itself. So diversification is the short term bet that we should take. This is the point number one. And the larger picture in the long term is obviously Atmanirbhar Bharat. Is there anything new that you have learned here? The approach, international relations is all about the same thing being repeated through different lens. One more important lesson that you need to learn. In this whole game between Russia and US, how does India fit in? Because both Russia and US want India to act as a stabilizing force in this region. Both the countries want India, both from a market standpoint, also from a strategic standpoint. What is the strategic standpoint here? To counter China. At the same time, you have multilateral organizations which are taking a back seat. What are these multilateral organizations? One, you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where you have BRICS. US is not really happy with BRICS. And China is not happy with Quad. So we have to be a part of this organizations which act like a balancing force. And we have to stick to the agenda of that organization. For example, if Quad is meant for economic reasons, let it be. Even if the projection is that it is a counter to the Chinese BRI or the Belt and Road Initiative, so wait. We have to act in such a way that we are not dependent on individuals, and therefore we have to keep all the diplomatic channels, all the multilateral organizations that we are a part of active. And this requires diplomatic maneuvering in all the fronts, not just an individual who is driving this charisma through his charisma. Clear? This is the lesson that we have to take away. The path to ending global hunger runs through India. We'll get back to this in the end, because this is also related to our answer writing today. Who decides nominations to the UT assemblies? This is an interesting article. Where will you put this? Union territories. If you have to map it to a syllabus, where will you put it? Federalism. Okay. Division of powers. Now let me ask this question. In federalism, what is the central facet? That India is a union of states, right? So there is a unitary bias. Now when you have this unitary bias, how will this unitary bias accommodate the necessity for union territories? Did you get my question? You are accepting that Indian federalism has a shift towards, like, if there is a balance like this. Okay. You are more inclined towards the center side here than the subnational units. The balance is towards the center. We already accepted this through the constitutional design itself. In such a scenario, why should we even allow union territories? See, there are two kinds of federal units. One at the center and two at the state. Why are we having states? Because regional autonomy should be respected, culture should be respected, administrative ease should be respected. Fine, we had the states. Now why are we allowing the union territories to exist? Why not make them states? Exactly. You have to take strategic advantage as well as administrative advantage to take a decision if certain region can be a state in itself. What if you give statehood? Again, it will become a strategic disadvantage sometimes. The very purpose with which they are existing is, one, to recognize the need for a separate administrative setup, and yet at the same time comply with the center's dominance. Certain regions have multiple reasons to exist. For example, the reason why the national capital region is a UT, and the reason why Jammu and Kashmir has been, I would rather say, the Ladakh and other parts, why are they UT? And Daman and Diu, why are they UT? Are different. So for different reasons, different administrative setups are given, and therefore, how you rule that region should be through a law made by Parliament. Yes or no? And the principle of any governing institution can, it should always be about accountability. You cannot escape this accountability. Without accountability, democracy will become meaningless. Clear? With this context, I will tell you what the Ministry of Home Affairs told the Ladakh High Court. What did they say? Lieutenant Governor can directly nominate without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Now, do you see a problem in this proposition? What is the problem? See, why do you need aid and advice of the Council of Ministers? Fine. When you have an elected government, what does it mean? Even if it's a union territory, let's say for example Delhi. Why do you have a Lieutenant Governor? The link between the democratically elected set of people and the center, the checks and balances like we envision, is through this person. Such a kind of a position should respect that balance, not tilt it in the favor of union. Right? So, by norm, do you think it is advisable to have aid and advice of ministers, Council of Ministers, to ensure that transparency and accountability is there? Is there a reason to bypass this? So, let's say for example, if you think democracy is not needed, then why even have a legislature there? Right? If you have a legislature, and in smaller places like this, you are setting a precedent. If you at one place, if you're saying that, okay, Lieutenant Governor need not take the advice of this Council of Ministers, it will become a logical inconsistency in some other place. You have union territories like Puducherry, which have small set of MLAs, and these nominated candidates can shift the balance. So this is antithetical to the idea of democracy, and we need to have certain rules and procedures. So this is what the article says. But having said that, the article itself quotes that this rule is applicable only for Ladakh. So is it about a norm which can potentially cause a danger in the future, or is it about an extrapolation? It is up to you to decide. As of now, is it applicable in Puducherry? No. So, different regions have different logic of administration. Let the courts come up with their own versions. In the same article, you will see some important case laws, and that is why they are important. See, for example, Lakshmi Narayan versus Union of India case. The court upheld the power of union government to nominate 3 members to the assembly, and that it is not to be based on the advice of the UT's Council of Ministers. So you already have a precedent. Now, as an interpreter of the Constitution, Supreme Court is well advised to give this kind of judgment. So you need to use judicial wisdom to either support or reject a proposition. So it's up to you to decide now based on this facts. Okay? How are you going to present your argument depends completely on these facts alone, not if hypothetical cases, if what will happen if it happens in Puducherry, etc. So that's the takeaway. Clear? Now let's go back to the article on hunger, global hunger, etc. What is hunger? What is hunger? Mind you, this is GS2 subject. Please don't give me philosophical answers. I don't want any motivational gyan. Just a heads up. What is hunger? Shortfall in? Okay. So shortfall in nutrition, basically. To simply put, we can say shortfall in nutrition. Right. What do you mean by nutrients? What are the various facets of these nutrients? Are you aware of it? Please tell me. Carbohydrates, proteins, and macro and micronutrients. Largely put. Macro and micronutrients. Clear? And then there is a healthy balance which the World Health Organization proposes. For example, carbohydrate, protein, and fat ratio. There is a prescribed standard formula for this. And micronutrients, you have daily requirements. So when you are supposed to say that, when you are as a state, you have a responsibility towards your citizens to ensure that no person is hungry. Right? On what basis are you saying this? Firstly, you have Article 21. Secondly, in DPSPs, what is Article 47? Does it specifically talk about nutrition? Go back and have a look. Okay. On these two fronts, it is the duty of the state to ensure that people are not remaining hungry. Now, when it comes to policy discourse, there are two levels of hunger or two dimensions of hunger. If you want to ensure that a person is healthy, and if you are running short of resources, let's say you have this amount of budget and this amount of population, every developing country would first prioritize at least keeping them alive, making sure they are well fed. So the first policy target would always be about calorie requirements. And this has been the approach of India. So when I say calorie requirements, we are focusing on some of the macronutrients, not all also. So when I am saying hunger, it has mentions calorie as well as nutrition. And nutrition. So in the absence of a complete balanced meal, what will happen? Your nutrition requirements will be not met. And this concept is called hidden hunger. Why is it called hidden hunger? See, if a person is weak, give him enough carbohydrates, that person will sit, wake up and sit. It is not going to put him in danger. But when a person is malnourished in the sense that he is not having enough protein, enough fat, enough micronutrients, in the longer run, it will cause issues. And this is the problem that this country is facing. So, if you are under the illusion that only poor people will be malnourished, the concept of hidden hunger is here to welcome you. And it depends on your lifestyle choices. How? I'll tell you. Let's say if you are picking a diet that is completely devoid of protein or any micronutrients or fiber, which is not a balanced meal, you are most likely to have this concept of hidden hunger. Most of us will have vitamin D deficiency. In a tropical country, it's a shame that we have vitamin D deficiency. Most of us will have B12 deficiency because we don't eat proper leafy vegetables. Most of us are having calcium deficiency because it is linked to vitamin D. Why is this? Because of our choices. And these choices are influenced by our policies. Right? How, for example, yesterday we discussed about PDS. What is procured in PDS? Rice and wheat. Why only rice and wheat? Because it has a multifold impact. How? I'll tell you. Our agriculture is not viewed as a business. It is looked at from two dimensions. One, as a source for farmer income security. And the second dimension is food security. And if you leave these two aspects to the market, poor people cannot survive. And we cannot achieve the global targets like SDGs. SDG 2 talks about hunger issues, eliminating hunger issues. Clear? Now it is in this setup that you need to understand that our emphasis has always been on food security and farmer income security, and we have not cared about two other dimensions which are equally important in a sustainable agricultural business. One is environmental security, sustainability, sorry, not security. And then the second dimension is diversification, moving away from food security towards nutritional security. Clear? Everyone? So these are the problems that India has. In the beginning, when we did not have enough food grains, we went towards green revolution, used the high yielding varieties, seeds, and mass produced rice and wheat in some certain pockets of this country to ensure that poverty is addressed in multiple ways, multiple phases. So India did achieve a lot, and it is in this context you have to remember an important scheme called ICDS. And coupled with this, you have midday meal scheme. See, malnourishment is a very big concern primarily in children. Children, why? Because in 0 to 6 years, these years are where you will see not just cognitive development but also physical development of a child. So if a child is not healthy in these years, the future of this country is in danger. So one of the most strategic interventions, despite all the allegations of corruption, etc., is this midday meal scheme and the Integrated Child Development Program, ICDS. It started way back in 1970s, somewhere around 75, if I'm not wrong. So all these Anganwadi workers, Asha workers, etc., who are operating at the ground level, feeding these kids. Yes, there were many incidents of corruption, but overall, if you take a look at our nutritional profile, yes, we still have our problems, but we have come a long way. And thanks to the policy interventions of the governments, successive governments, despite all the shortcomings, we have come a long way. Today, in most midday meal schemes across the country, the kids are having access to well-cooked, nutritious food, and that is a motivation for a lot of poor families to send their kids to the schools. And that's how India has shown the world that poverty cannot stop education and cannot let kids go malnourished. So for every achievement that we speak about on a macro level, there will be anecdotal evidences where things have gone wrong. where there have been instances of corruption. But take a look at the macro picture. If we want to go much farther, it's also important to appreciate how far we have come, right? And we cannot afford to forget that. So, in this context, we had the latest FAO report, Food and Agricultural Organizations report, status of food security across the world, right? And the writer who is coming up with this article, who wrote this article, appreciates India's policy interventions in multiple levels. Okay, so whether it is the portion scheme that we started in 2021 by integrating this ICDS and the midday meal scheme, or the interventions at farmer income level to promote sustainable practices like millet production, etc. All these are examples to the world. Not just this. The other day we were talking about how investments into agriculture should begin with not just physical infra but also digital infra. Right? So let's say a technology stack like AgriStack. India has developed it, and this can be a replicable model of global governance. How, for example, you create this AgriStack, and on this AgriStack you will link it to the PDS system. So let's say, for example, the allegation of corruption, right? Either you can go for a direct benefit transfer, or you can also link these PDS directly to the Aadhaar, and the user will validate whether the expected ration reaches them or not. This is one way where we can revolutionize, and technology can be an enabler in the sense that UPI success has shown that digital illiteracy cannot be a barrier if we really intend to solve the problem. And if we can create this replicable architecture, the digital architecture, we can stand as an example for the global south. And in such a scenario, you will have a lot of leverage where this technology can be replicated across different countries, and that can bring in more revenue to the Indian companies as well. So not only are we having an economic advantage, we're also having a strategic leverage in the global south. And this is the lesson that India can teach to the world. This is what is given in the article. All this is fine. But how you can link this article to inclusive growth and GS1, the causes which will perpetuate this poverty. This is what we are extending beyond the article given. See, poverty as a social issue, poverty as an economic issue. There are two ways to look at it. Now, let's look at poverty from GS1 standpoint and poverty from GS3 standpoint. Poverty as a economic issue, if you're talking about it. What is poverty in economic standpoint? Absence of money, right? So if I just give you money, will the problem be solved? There is this famous saying, if you give man a fish, you will feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you will feed him for the rest of the life. The reason, the structural reason why an individual is poor is not primarily an economic reason, it is a social reason. So this brings us back to this concept of salient features of Indian society and all the structural factors which are causing or acting like barriers for growth, for expression of one's potential. They will act as the reasons for. These are the reasons for poverty. Can you tell me what are these reasons? If you know the salient features of Indian society, you can answer this. First one is caste discrimination. Social stratification or caste, one and the same. What else? Distress migration. Gender norms. Rigid gender norms. What else? Lack of access. So we are talking about regional problems, regional inequality, or gender inequality, or inequality of every sorts. And this will lead to a vicious cycle of poverty. And where can you break this chain? Just like you can see between GS1 and GS2, GS1 and GS3, you can break that vicious cycle through GS2, that is through polity, rights, and governance. Clear? Did you understand the link? The causes, the consequences, the vicious cycle, what breaks the vicious cycle, and therefore democracy is very powerful. And you can talk about the concept of development as freedom. Again, I am trying to bring in my own opinion here from development as freedom to, I'll just extrapolate that idea. This can be useful for your essay. See, I hope you are following me. We spoke about the reasons in GS1, the consequences in GS3, how to break that cycle in GS2. Clear? Now, after this is broken, if we are looking at the concept of inclusive growth, let's say the cycle has been broken. Now we have to continue doing that. And to continue doing that, even for this GS2 institutions, you need money. Right? How do we spend that money? With what philosophy should you spend that money once the cycle is broken? Because even for the next generation, you need a system in place, a guiding philosophy in place to make that objective up and running again and again. And this is where you come and read this concept of inclusive growth. Okay. So what do you read in this inclusive growth? You read a strategy where you are efficiently allocating the resources so that people don't go back into poverty. So this is about, see, you have a framework in polity. Polity says you have to give everyone rights. Okay, fair enough. But how? What is the strategy? I'll give rights, but where will money come from? Money doesn't grow on trees, or money doesn't just magically appear if we want rights. We need a strategy. We need a game plan. And all that should be democratic in nature. And that strategy is inclusive growth. And what should be the driving force of this inclusive growth strategies? Empowerment. I don't want freebies. Don't give me fish again. I want to learn how to fish. And that strategy where you are investing in the individual empowerment so that every individual can express their freedom. And that strategy, when you reach that stage where you can express your potential, that is the true definition of development. Clear? And this is the guiding light of how developmental strategies should be designed and how poverty alleviation programs should be designed. because poverty is hardly unidimensional. Hunger is not just about food. Now we are entering into the philosophy realm. Hunger is also about an unflinching commitment to express your own potential. And therefore, the state should be an enabler for that. Clear? So, we started from GS2. We expanded that understanding to GS3 and GS1. And also linked it to the concept of development as freedom, which you can use in ethics as a framework and also in essay. Clear? And this explains the structural interlinkages between various subject papers on the issue of poverty. So we discussed two things here. One, content for GS2 and the specific programs, and framework for other subjects. Clear? So there is a difference between frameworks and content. And these classes are not just meant for content summarization, but also for establishing these frameworks. Clear? This brings us to the end of the online session. So after a brief pause, we will start the offline